It's often exciting to look to the future of UNO, what it might be like in times to come. Sometimes, though, it's important to stop and take a good look at the past of the university, the people and the happenings that help make the excitement of future history possible. With this in mind, join me for Reflections in Time. My guest for this Reflections in Time, one of my guests, prompted this nomination for Great Teacher Award. Throughout his career, he's been a standard of excellence, inspiring his students to the high levels of achievement by which he measures his own life. If ever any UNO faculty member has dignified the teaching profession, it's Dr. Ralph Wardle. Dr. Wardle served this university for 32 years, first as an instructor, then an associate professor, and finally professor and chairman of the English department. He received the Dexter Traveling Fellowship while at Harvard and was appointed Brooks Fellow in Literature at the University of Queensland, Australia, and was named Albert W. Jeffers Professor of English at this university, a considerable honor, I might add. He was nominated Regent Professor, one of the first foundation professors, as well as Great Teacher. And our great teacher brought his good wife along too, Mary, and of which I'm so happy today. Mary met Ralph, as I understand it, while she was an undergraduate and an English major at Radcliffe, and he was a graduate teaching assistant. They married in the year 1936 and raised 4 children. Besides being active in many civic and university activities, such as the Tuesday Musical Society, Joslin Art Museum, and Faculty Wives Club, Mary has long been involved in her husband's research and his writing. Special pleasure to have you both with me this afternoon as we visit and reflect a little bit. And let's go at it, shall we? Way back to 38, 2 years after you were married, you came to Omaha.
Right.
And just as you remember it, what was it like, and what were your first impressions after coming out of the East and wherever else you came from and that sort of thing?
Well, we came out of the East advisedly because the next day the hurricane of 1938 took place. And we'd have been blown all the way to Omaha if we had just waited a day.
Your timing was good.
We came by train, of course. Nobody traveled by plane in those days.
No.
And we arrived at the old Union Station, the Burlington Station.
They were right.
And then we're met by the chairman of the department. In those days, apparently the chairman of the department came out to meet you when you arrived. I don't believe they do that nowadays.
No.
It was more of an event. And the building, of course, was all new. It was the year the building had been completed.
Yes, as we looked at the opening pictures before we started to visit now, was that what it looked like?
I think they had landscaped by the time we got here, and that looked as if it were all torn up. But otherwise, it was just brand new, and our great boast was that we were the only completely air-conditioned university in the world, because this was air-conditioned by means of a flow of water that ran underneath the building. Still does, I suppose.
And everything generally, the university totally was really housed in that building, was it not?
Absolutely, everything. Library, gymnasium, locker rooms,
Everything.
what else? Cafeteria, everything.
Mary, do you remember those first days and how you started to get acquainted and some of the first people you met, and what were your impressions there?
Well, I was expecting our first child, and so the first thing I wanted to know was a good obstetrician. And the chairman was a bachelor, so it really threw him a little bit, but he was really awfully kind and found out from a friend of his. And we loved it from the very beginning. People were awfully kind, awfully good to us. We found a good church that we still belong to, and it was wonderful. It's always been just wonderful here.
Now,
And Margaret Earl was the first one who called on you for the faculty women's
Yes,
club, wasn't she?
yes. Her husband was chairman of the mathematics department.
James Earl.
And, Jim Earl, yeah.
And so she's one of the first people in memory then.
Oh, yes. Still going strong, too,
Yes,
I might
she
add.
is.
Yes.
We record this in 1979, and yes, she's very active, as I understand it, yet. Well, now, was this your first teaching experience, really? You've done some graduate teaching, I imagine, that sort of thing.
Yes, I had taught part-time at Harvard And before that, I taught 2 years in a boys' prep school in Arizona.
Oh.
But this was my first full-time university experience. And because the building was new, the enrollment had doubled that fall. And they were hiring in people at the last minute. Classes had been in operation for, I think, 2 weeks when I arrived. We arrived late at night, and I thought maybe I'd have some time, to get myself acclimated. And the chairman said, I think you ought to start teaching your classes tomorrow. And so I went in, and I have no idea what I said. I talked steadily for 50 minutes in a nervous, erratic sort of way. Practically told them everything I planned to say for the whole semester in the one 50-minute period. But I got through it.
That was a quick baptism in one night and on the job in the morning.
Right. And then we had another incarnation, because we left after 2 years in 1940, and I taught at Cornell University, and then things didn't turn out well there, and there was an opening back here. So I came back in 1944, when the war was in progress, and the enrollment had dropped seriously. Well, it was about half what it had been before. You see, it was 500 in the old campus, and then 1,000 when they put up the new building.
Really shot up originally.
Yeah, in 38,
yes.
that one fall. And by this time, in 44, it was down to 500 again, because we had no dormitories and couldn't accommodate any training programs.
Yeah.
I think they had one small one, but nothing like what most universities had.
So it was almost a girls' school then, too, wasn't it?
It was, and, well, for example, in an upper-class course in English, I'd have probably 3 people. It was very strange. It was like tutoring, really, more than teaching.
But you folks went back out east to Cornell, and were intending perhaps to stay in that part of the world then?
Yes.
For a while.
Mm-hmm. But the department there was in a terrible mess, and as we learned when we got there, they had a series of chairmen. They got changing, and all sorts of rivalries had gone up in the department. It was a pretty wretched place. It was a beautiful place to live, but the atmosphere was uncomfortable in many ways. And we were very glad to come back to Omaha in 1944.
So now it's like coming home after being
It
away
is
for a
coming
little while.
home. Yes, it really is.
Remembering the academic program as you began in 38, or the second time you came back, either time, Dr. Wardle, how is it, not how has it changed, but what was it like then? What sorts of things did we offer young people who wanted to major or minor or just take an English course or two?
Oh, you mean in the English department?
Yes.
Well, I really haven't checked on what they've done since I left the campus. They may have changed everything.
Yeah. No, I meant back in those days as you...
It remained pretty consistent. When I took over as chairman, as I did 2 years later, I made changes, but we stuck pretty well with those for a long, long time. Although always, of course, freshman English was undergoing changes. We were always innovating in freshman English. And after a few years, we were using the same innovations that we'd used 10 or 20 years ago.
Became new all over again.
Freshman English, of course, is a perennial problem, always will, because students have had to take English all the way through school. They're fed up with it, unless they're really, interested in it. And you just have to fight with them. And if they haven't learned by the time they get to college, they're not likely to learn a great deal in the course of the 1 year. I mean, mastery of all the fine points of composition, that's the real problem, freshman English. So I don't think there are really great changes, except the minor ones that I made. I mean, I made certain different requirements. Oh, and I loosened things up a bit, too, for people who had to take only 1 semester of the regular freshman English. Then I introduced some courses in the short story and contemporary drama, contemporary novel, that I thought would be more interesting to them than the survey of English literature. Before, that had been the only literature course offered.
Really enlarged the offerings then, too, as time went along. When did the enrollment start to sort of come back up? Was it right after the war?
After the war, yes. You see, that happened in a great hurry. I had taken off for the summer, not anticipating what was going to happen. And suddenly we needed more people, a number of them. And we hired up, I can't remember how many, in a very short period of time, simply because we had to have them. And there were, I suppose there were 6 or 8 people. And that was at the same time that I took over as chairman. So everything happened at once. In 1946 it was.
Right at the end of
great expansion came. And I was hiring people without having laid eyes on them. But it worked out beautifully. I said we'd have to do this. The only way I could see to manage it with all these old people, I mean, people who'd been there for a long time, and the new ones coming in, and really more new ones than there were old ones at that point. We had a party the first Saturday night. I just said, well, now we'll go ahead with it and make believe everybody likes each other, and it worked out very well.
And it did work out that way.
Yeah.
You mentioned the old and the new people, and you and both of you can be involved in this answer, if you will. Remember those early years, the really early beginning years, as you sort of got your feet into it here. Who were some of the people in memory? You mentioned Margaret Earl, some of the other people in your department and others who stand out in memory that were involved at the university at that time. Who were some of those people?
Well, Paul, I think the interesting thing is, when I look back on it, is that we knew everybody on campus.
Yeah.
I mean, and knew a great many students, too. I mean, even I knew students. It was, I don't want to talk about the good old days as if they could never come back or anything of this sort, but it was really very pleasant to come here and see everyone you knew, and I always felt very much at home on the campus. I enjoyed going up to my husband's office and walking down the corridor and seeing all the people and knowing them all very well. It was really very nice. And then we had the English club met at our house, and once in a while we'd have didn't you have some graduate classes?
Yeah.
That was really a lot of fun. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, in those days, they used to charge the graduate students twice as much as they did undergraduates, and I thought that was unfair. I thought they should have some sort of an extra privilege. So I would consult each time I had graduate students in a class. I mean, it was a class that was open to graduates and undergraduates. And I would ask them if they would like to meet at our house on, I don't know, one night a week for several weeks toward the end of the semester, and read the papers they'd written and just have open discussion of them.
Yes.
And so they did. And it was amusing the way they reacted. I mean, they felt grateful. They wanted to do something for us. And I remember there was one woman brought us some iris bulbs, and another one brought us some Pinucci. You never knew. But they always felt that they wanted, to give you something to thank you.
Sort of like the minister of the church, they bring them gifts.
Fun. And every time there was a new baby in the house, they all wanted to... We had to practically hide the baby so they could get on with their classes because they all wanted to hold the baby. But
sounded like the classes lasted a long time and were lots of fun.
They were. They really were. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned some of the people and some of the programs. The university generally, as you looked at it in those days, and then I want to come back in a minute to you, Mary, and ask you a question. Was it, yes, we've expanded and changed, but in those very early years, in the 30s and in the 40s and the post-war years, as you became a department chairman, was the program totally kind of small compared to what it became in the 50s and 60s?
Oh, yes, inevitably. Yeah. Of course, we didn't have the colleges.
Yes, we were just one, or was it two? The two
one
colleges.
College. I think they counted the college of, they called it adult education. I don't know what it is lately. General education, continuing education.
Continuing studies, I think now.
Yeah, but it was a separate college under Dean Hosman. But except for that, I think, at least at first, it was just the one arts college. Included everything.
And I suppose that made it a little tough on students in terms of choice. Some things weren't offered every semester, were they?
Oh, no. No. In fact, we used to alternate practically always in the English department.
So that just every other year, you had to really plan a program then as a student over a number of years, didn't you, if you were majoring in the area, for example?
Well, what I did was they had a choice of two courses. They had to fulfill, so many categories. And there would be take this or this, and one of those would be offered every year, you see, so that they could, conceivably, they could do it all in 1 year. They had the energy they wouldn't have, but basically everything was available every year, but they were alternates.
Mary, turning to you for just a moment for a few minutes here now. Let's, I mentioned in the opening comment there are some of the things you're involved with, and I'm quite sure that's about 1/10 of them, really. As you indicated just a moment ago, you were happy to be involved in the campus and coming by Ralph's office and all these things, but in a formal way, you got involved with the women's club very early, didn't you? Things like that.
Oh, yes. Well, I think we all were in those days. You remember there weren't as many working wives.
No.
And we all came to the meetings, and it was really, really a lot of fun. And I remember the year that I was president, Ellen Lord and I she was program chairman, I think, and we had some interesting things we thought for people to do. And it was that year that the club decided that we would have a scholarship program, and it eventually became the Josephine Bail Memorial Scholarship. And now, because times have changed, we no longer just give it to a woman. It's given to either a man or a woman on the campus, and I think they give, I don't know whether it's $100 or $200 tuition money, which is really very nice.
Yes, very helpful. Yes, I think what you're suggesting here is something I've noticed in the years I've been here, too, is there was a time, for a variety of reasons, when the families, the wives at least, of the faculty and staff were quite involved in campus activity in various ways. And I think that relates to what you were mentioning about working wives and that sort of thing, and certainly other interests, too, and other things to do now, perhaps.
And the very smallness of it, too.
Yeah.
That as you knew people, as you went across, well, when you were in the building, everybody was in the one building. That made a great difference. You saw people in the library, you saw people in the cafeteria. And there was a separate faculty dining room.
Yes, I remember that.
And there you saw everybody. It wasn't a large room. It wasn't much larger than this room.
No.
Everybody practically ate there. People didn't drive off campus for lunch, as they tend to do in later years. So that you really knew everybody by name, or felt embarrassed if you didn't. Nowadays, before I retired, you'd cross the campus and you'd say, well, I suppose that's a faculty member because of his age, but you wouldn't know.
No.
And you wouldn't even know that
That's
way
one thing I
either.
like about teaching at Creighton now, that you do know the people. And then, too, something more informal about it. You expect to see people you know, and people say hello to you whether they know you or not.
Yeah. One thing I remember in my years, together with you people and others, some of the fun socially we've had over the years. The potluck Christmas party.
Yeah.
Remember them?
Yes.
Yeah, and now they're catered, and everything is changed. But I don't want to give the impression either that everything's gone to pot, the good old days. And so on.
I know. That's
Because
terrible.
I'm sure academically the university is a good deal stronger than it was in the days when it was, more of a family situation. Everybody was more pally. But that's very nice, and it's fun, but it's not the important thing.
No.
And the important thing we've paid more attention to lately.
Let's speak of the more important things, as you suggest, for a little while now. I don't think we discussed this when I was with you in your home a few days ago, but I think the friends who might sit down and watch our tape together in years to come would like to know this. I think your reputation as a teacher is about as strong professionally as anyone we've ever had on our campus here. And I think many people would be interested in the early days of teaching, some of the things you grew to know and like, and your philosophy generally, I guess, of teaching, some of the things that have held you together in the classroom as you began that first day, after you got off the train, and before that. If you can go way back, Ralph, let's talk about when you started to teach. What led you into this kind of work? Can you remember some of the things that prompted you to do it?
Well, there was just one thing. I was interested in English. I was interested in writing and reading when I was in school. And I went to a public high school where every teacher I ever had was a woman.
I don't think we asked you both where you came from originally.
Woonsocket, Rhode Island. Mary's from Brooklyn, New York. Right?
Yeah.
I could almost tell by your accent.
And I went to a public high school, and I had women teachers, and it never occurred to me that a man could teach English until I went away to school for a year before I went to college. And I had a man teacher there, and he said to me one day, what do you plan to do with your life? And I said, oh, I'd like to write, or be a journalist or something of that sort. And he said, did you ever think of being an English teacher? And it never had occurred to me, and just like that, that was it. And I never changed my mind from that minute on.
So the decision was made with his help one day.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's the sort of thing that you can do for a student, and that's one of the rewards of teaching.
Yeah. Well, over the years, your teaching philosophy was evolved, I imagine, from doing it in part.
Yes, it was. In fact, it never evolved. I've always been perfectly helpless when people ask me what my philosophy of teaching was. I remember years ago, the education college used to send you people around every fall one of their first jobs was to write a paper on people's educational philosophy. And they used to come to the door and knock and say, would you please tell me your educational philosophy? And I said, well, it's like a Boy Scouts. Be prepared.
Yes.
That was as far as I could go. And, you know, from day to day, be prepared. Try to find out what will be interesting to the students. Hold their attention. But, you know, just have it. Well, my problem is I over-prepare. I get into class and talk so fast that people are confused. So that's my confessional.
Oh, they're not that confused. But I'll tell you, the funny thing is, every morning after he gets ready to go off to school, I find in the wastepaper basket by his desk last year's notes, because the night before he's made out new notes, so that there they sit. Out they go, because I know he has a complete set with him, except on occasion he has forgotten.
Well, I have a system now. It used to be that sometimes I would, you know, if you're just throwing away things, throw away my notes,
Yes.
and then start looking for them. And or Mary would see notes in there and wonder. So now, whatever I put into the wastebasket is to be discarded. It's folded up in a crazy sort of way so that she'll know.
You have a,
That's
you have
how it
clues
can
to let her
go.
know.
He's got it all up here. Oh.
When, excuse me.
I was going to say, you were talking about some of the interesting people.
Yeah.
What about Alice Smith? You could tell about Alice Smith, and particularly her later career.
Yeah, I think some of these people you'll mention are great for a tape
Yes,
like
they're
this
far
because
away, and you wouldn't
they're-
get in touch with them.
Yes, we wouldn't, probably.
No.
She was registrar and director of admissions when we arrived. Yes.
Oh,
Well,
I know
thought you were
she
looking at me
was,
as if
but
you
I
didn't think
wondered
so.
why that was so interesting.
Well, the important thing is that she was really in control. The first day I arrived on the campus, the chairman took me in and said, "This is Miss Smith. If you have any questions, come to her."
That
And it
was,
right.
that was true.
She
That was
really knew everything
true.
was going on.
She did. Mm-hmm.
And remained in that position for a long time.
Oh,
and
indeed.
then, remember, you had a telephone call one day. Someone said Edgar Holt, who had been dean,
Oh, yes.
is coming back to town. His wife had died. He's coming, and he's looking for a wife
That's true.
now. Remember?
Well, I don't remember.
You
No, I
s-
remembered the telephone call, but I can't remember. I certainly didn't suggest Alice Smith.
You certainly did.
Did I?
The person
Oh,
said, "Do you
good
have
for
any
me."
suggestions?" And you said, "Yes, Alice Smith." And by gosh, they had a party, and
That's
Alice
true.
and Edgar met after all those years, and within a couple of weeks, maybe a month, but not much more,
They
they
were
just went
married.
off, and she telephoned the president from the airport and said, "I'm resigning, I'm married, and I'm leaving for Tennessee," or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, I knew Alice Smith, too, and I'd never heard this side of the
Well, I
story.
don't know
or
that
the-
it
That
was
is
generally
true.
known, but it
No,
ought to be
that is
recorded
true.
for
It's all
history.
coming
Yes.
back. Yeah, it is all coming back. That was funny. I don't know why I buried that. That wasn't so terrible.
No, that's very interesting and
Got
exciting.
her a nice husband. Yes.
Now, there are certainly other lots of people.
Well,
Ralph-
Ellen Lord was
Yeah.
a great friend, and it is a great friend still. She was librarian, and Ralph always said she was the best librarian he ever knew, and believe me, he's been inside a few libraries.
I think that's a real tribute in this case,
It
yes.
was a real tribute, still is. And we see her now, but she's suffered a great change. She's no longer like herself
Yes,
at
in
all.
1979 when we're recording, she is not well.
Oh, no,
Oh,
not
no.
well at all. Not well at all. And doesn't even have that occasional flash of humor that she did have for a long time.
Tremendous
Even when
sense of
she
humor,
first
yes.
went into the nursing home. But she was a wonderful friend and a wonderful librarian and a quick wit, really. Lots
know,
of fun.
Let's pause there a little bit because research and libraries have been so much a part of your life, Ralph.
Mhm.
And your tribute to Ellen. I think of the years when I first came on this campus and went to the little library we had, and then the changes. In terms of our library and our university's growth, have they sort of gone hand in hand? In your
Oh,
memory?
yes. Well, of course, for one thing, there's been so much more money available in recent years. In the old days, we had, I can't remember, I suppose it was maybe $500 a year to spend in the English department. And you had to choose, you know. There were a lot of books that you would like to have that you just couldn't afford to have. But as time went on and those amounts increased, you could spend ever so much more and get ever so much more. So, and then, too, this was happening, of course, at a time when universities generally were expanding. And a great many old books that we hadn't been able to buy when they were new were being reprinted and became available on the market, so that we were able to fill in a good deal of the past material that we hadn't been able to buy when it first came out.
I imagine in the first years you were kind of uncomfortable with the collection generally in terms of a library from what you had been used to in years gone by.
Yes, I didn't really attempt to use it. I did all my research in the summertime. I went east.
Yes, as I recall, you spent a lot of time out east, didn't you, in the summer?
Yes,
I mean, that for personal reasons, too. You had a lot of family and all that.
Well, yes, our families were all there then, and of course they're all there now, but they're a different generation.
Yes.
Our children are there now.
Are all there now.
But our mothers, our fathers had both died earlier, but our mothers were there, and aunts and uncles and
sisters.
Yes, we each had a sister in the east. So we used to go back, and we found that we could rent a house in Lincoln, Massachusetts, which is out in the country, close to Cambridge, for less than we paid to rent our house here in Omaha. And it was amazing how regularly, it was about 17 summers, I guess, that we rented a house, just put in the paper house for rent for crazy, we were going away the 20th of June, we'd be back the 5th of September, we'd put in house available, June 20th to September 5th, and there'd be somebody who wanted a house from June 20th to September 5th.
The good old days, and you found comparable accommodations for less there.
Yeah, curiously enough.
So that made for a wonderful summer of research, writing, reflection.
Yeah.
Over the years, your husband's done a lot of writing, hasn't he?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I enjoy the proofreading and that kind of thing we do together. I really do. I also enjoy very much going to a library with him. The funny libraries we've gone to, and he'll hand me a whole sheaf of stuff, and he'll say, well, now read through and look for this name and that name and the other name. I get all the junk to do, and he gets all the interesting things. But it is fun just to work together. I really love it. We worked in one funny little library in London that was so cold that we could tell it was time for lunch when we got absolutely congealed up to our waists, and then we knew it was time to go out.
This was in June, too.
In June.
What it was
really?
like in December.
I just don't know what it was like.
Mm.
But I love that. I really do that.
You spend
we
many
spent
years
our
there.
honeymoon in Edinburgh and in London in libraries.
That's right,
Yeah, on that Dexter Fellowship you talked about. Two of us went over on that, and we work all day in the library and then walk around the city at night. It was really a lot of fun. It's great.
You've really
I love
spent
it.
lots of time in England, haven't you, over the years? And it started, as you say, right after you were married in the 30s.
Absolutely, yeah. 36.
It was our first trip, both of us, in 1936. And I got that traveling fellowship, which, believe it or not, was for $600. And then Mary's two maiden aunts, who lived with her mother was a widow, and the family all lived together, gave us $100 to spend. And on $700, we went abroad in the middle of June, came back Labor Day, paid our fare over and back, our expenses while we were there, and we had $100 left when we got
Can you imagine? And we didn't do badly. I mean, we
lived comfortably.
Yeah.
Incidentally, I should say that my salary when I arrived on this campus was $1,800, which, of course, looked pretty big in those days. And I always add to, lest people be concerned about our welfare, that it's more than doubled since then.
Yes. We managed to get along.
Well, now, along with spending time in Europe and going summers back east and living in the suburban Boston and Cambridge area, you really spent most of your summers in research and writing then, didn't you?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I was wondering, I suppose one of the things that you are best known for, and when people mention your names, talk about Shakespeare and Ralph Wardle. When did that part of your career and that specialty emphasis come in? Did that come in way back in early research, interest in
No,
English?
it really hasn't been a matter of research. My research has been in a later period, in the 19th century. But when I was at Cornell, and I don't remember quite why it was, there was somebody who was unable to teach the course in Shakespeare in 1/3 semester that they had. In those days, they had trimesters. They worked in 3 during the war.
Oh, yes.
And there was somebody who could teach, and they asked me if I would like to, and I was delighted, of course, to have the chance. And then when I came here, the man whom I had succeeded had been teaching Shakespeare. So I took over that Shakespeare course then. And it was just, you know, I worked my way in. Of course, I enjoyed Shakespeare and read him a good deal before, but I just worked my way into it.
So it just sort of happened?
It just sort of happened, yes. It wasn't that I was particularly prepared to do it, but I got in there, and then they made me chairman, and I hung on to it. You see, that was surprising.
So you said that was the only reason you wanted to be chairman. So you could hang on to the Shakespeare.
Well, that's interesting because I would think many people don't know that particular aspect of your life, and that's what they know you for. Often.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Yes.
They think I'm Shakespeare's Omaha representative, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
But I've never done any writing, and it's been curious, because in teaching, you know, and going over things over and over again, you do pick up little ideas that you think, well, now, this probably nobody has ever put on paper. But the Shakespeare bibliography is so complex, so long. To find out if somebody has written this before would take you longer than it would to write it, and so I just never wrote anything on Shakespeare.
So actually, much of your time in research, with Mary freezing in the library with you, and were spent in other things.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of them. Just recount some of the things that you spent a lot of your life working on and writing about and researching.
Well, I think you ought to tell about the Mary Wollstonecraft and how that started.
Yeah. All right.
Because that started right here on this campus.
Well, in town, at least.
Yeah.
I arrived in Omaha. I was asked to talk to, I think it was an AAUW book club. I was just baffled. I didn't know what I could say to them. And I'd gotten the notion that you were supposed to be polite about requests of that sort. So I racked my brain, and I remembered that I had heard about a Mary Wollstonecraft, who was the mother-in-law of Shelley, the poet, and who was the first feminist. And she had a very interesting sort of life, and so I thought, well, these people who are women interested in books ought to be interested in her. So I'll talk about her. And then I began to look up to see what was written about her, and very little was. And so since I'd been told in graduate school that I ought to continue my research, I thought, well, why not? I'm interested in her. The material is available. And I had a great break in that I got at her letters that no one had seen. Or at least they had been seen by one man under the supervision of her family, who said, well, you may see this and you may not see that, and you may say this and you may not say that. But of course, I was absolutely free. And I got at these letters, the first person in, well, it had been nearly 100 years who'd looked at them.
Yes. How did you go about becoming, how was it made possible that you could look at them that had been kept secret, in effect?
I looked up, I tried to find out where these letters were. I knew that this man in the 19th century had seen them.
Yeah.
I didn't know what had become of them. And I tried to find out. And I finally ran into a reference to the fact that the Shelley papers, the family papers, had been divided in 3 parts. One part had gone to the Bodleian Museum in Oxford, one part to Sir John C.E. Shelley Rolls, a descendant who'd married into the Rolls-Royce family, and one part into a man named Lord Abinger, who lived up in the northern part of Scotland. So I wrote letters to the 3 of them and said, do you have the letters of Mary Wollstonecraft? And Lord Abinger wrote back and said, yes, he did. And this was during the war. He said, and if I am in a position to, I will let you see them after the war. Any papers I may have, he said. He was very guarded, and I didn't know whether he would or he wouldn't, or how much supervision he'd give me. However, I saved up my money. I taught 3 semesters and got a little extra ahead and saved up my money to get over there. And then as soon as the war was over and I could travel, I wrote to him and said, I'm on my way. Are you going to let me see those papers and so on? He lived at Castle Inverlochie up in the Highlands, and I thought that would be romantic. I had a letter back from Lord Abinger, who was now the next Lord Abinger. The old man had died. His son had succeeded him. He had moved to London. He said, I have the papers here. Come over and help yourself. So there's nothing to it.
Yeah.
So,
And he had them all in an old desk, and I just went right through them and found...
That was an exciting summer,
Yeah,
wasn't
Yeah,
it?
oh, it was. Because by that time, I had written as much as I could without the letters. And I was able to fit all the information. I knew just what I could use, you know, in those letters, and copy that down, and then came back and had the great fun that summer, the rest of the summer, in fitting it together.
And out of it all came...
Biography of Mary Wollstonecraft. And that is the thing that has, what would you say, given me more of a reputation than anything else. I've done other books on Oliver Goldsmith and Hazlitt, and now I'm working on one on Charles Lamb. But because of the rise of feminism, Mary Wollstonecraft, who had been utterly unknown practically, has become a major figure. And my biography is 25 years old. There were none between that and 1970. Between 1970 and 1976, there were 6.
Is that right?
Isn't that funny?
And so yours is sort of the bedrock of more current writing then, too, perhaps, in that whole area relating to this woman.
Yeah, there was...
Yeah.
So that I hear from that book, which was the first, I mean, it's in paperback now, but it was the first I ever did, more than from the more recent ones.
Yes,
Well, our feminist daughter said, well, she said, I really have sort of a reputation because my father was the first one who ever wrote about Mary Wollstonecraft, the first feminist. Yeah, and it's a little annoying to the women, though, to have had a man do it, you know.
Yes. So it sounds like the most interesting and exciting research you might have been involved with, too.
Oh, it was, yeah. I went to the National Portrait Gallery in London because I knew they had a portrait of her. This was when I was working on the book, and I asked them if I could see it. And I asked them where it was, and they said, what they said was, it ain't hanging.
Yeah.
But I said, well, is there any chance I could see it? And they said, yes, we'll get it out for you. So they ushered me into a room, and they put up an easel, and an attendant came in and put the picture on the easel, and he walked out, and I sat there and communed, as it were, with Mary, and it was quite a thrill.
Yeah.
But, as I say, they had to get it out. A few years ago, we went back to the National Portrait Gallery for something else. We went in the door, and there was the portrait of Mary Wollstonecraft hanging in a very prominent position.
They hung it now.
Right out in the front office, yeah. Times have changed.
Yes, they have changed.
And I was vindicated.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, times have changed, but people in many ways remain much the same. And you know, we were into something earlier. Let's go back to that again, both of you, and do a little thinking and reminiscing about some of the interesting and important people in your academic and social lives in those early and mid-years here, or any of the 32 years here at UNO and the University of Omaha. What are some of the people who stand out? As I throw that at you, take a moment to think. We'll do just that then. Mary, either of you, pick up one of the people. You mentioned a few, and there are so many.
Well, I think probably Benjamin Boyce, who was chairman when we came here.
I was going to ask who that
I think
was.
he's probably our closest friend, and from university times. And he's now in Durham. He taught at Duke till he retired. We've kept in touch with him over the years. He and his wife are godparents to one of our children. And
He has a very nice sense of humor.
a wonderful sense of humor. Writes the most entertaining letters. Wish we'd saved them all, which we haven't.
We're talking about a span of 40 years of friendship here,
Oh, yes.
or more.
Oh, yes.
Yes, I feel that every once in a while. When I'm in Omaha, somebody I met when I first came, I'll think, well, I've known them for a long time, and then I stop to think, 1938, 1979, I've known them for 41 years.
Yeah.
Longer than most people have been alive.
Yes. Yes.
So he was an outstanding person.
He was. He really was. Bright man. Very conscientious teacher. Very good teacher.
Have any of your interviewees said anything about Espy?
No.
Oh, yes.
You knew Espy, did you? Professor Espinosa?
Oh, yes, I know him.
He was a very colorful character.
I
and
agree.
his wife, too.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And they had a club. What do they call it? Casa de las Americanas or something of that sort. They used to meet regularly, and they had a big party every spring, a very gay party. He was, of course, he had a very pronounced accent. He'd lived in this country for years.
Yes, he did. I remember
but it remained. I remember one time when his wife was ill, I said to him something about, how is your wife, Espy? And he said, he is very well. Apparently, still hasn't got his pronouns straight. But my prize story
I was going to say, you must
he
tell
used to
that
lecture
one.
in the humanities course. And one day he was talking about something, And he said, "It is unique." And he looked all around. I think he felt the students didn't know what he was talking about, you see. He said, "Don't you know these words? It is a very good one. It is spelled U-N-I-C."
There were always Espy stories going around.
Really?
Oh, I remember him well. We were housed in the same general area when I first came to university in the 50s.
Yeah.
And I had such a terrible time understanding him some of the time.
Yes.
It seemed like we'd meet in reverberating rooms, and that booming voice and his dialect or his manner of speech made it a little tough.
Yeah.
And he was, I say, he was unaware of, well, vocabulary, and he kept that pronounced accent for years and years and years, and it must have been 40 years since he'd been here. And then, in addition to all that, he was out of touch in another way. He had no idea what was going on the campus at the University of Omaha, for one thing. I remember one day he called me. There was a great deal of concern about foreign language requirements for graduate work and so on. And he called me and said, "Wardle, he's Espinosa." I said, "Yes, Espy, what's on your mind?" He said, "What are the requirements for the PhD, in foreign language for the PhD at the University of Omaha?" I said, "Espy, we don't offer the PhD." He said, "We don't?"
Really.
Never had occurred to me. Never found out.
These are the days when he was the department head.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Surely.
Oh, that's
Well,
colorful
Alice
people.
Smith
I'll
could
vote for him,
straighten
too.
him out. Yes.
Yes, he hadn't been told to go to Alice Smith.
No, I guess he hadn't.
Yes,
He
Alice
really
had the
hadn't.
answers.
Wilford Payne was another one.
Oh, yeah.
Who was,
Yes.
he and his wife were both great people. They always had a lot of students and a lot of contact with students, too.
And he had a great following.
Yes,
He was a very good lecturer.
excellent
the,
lecturer. He could open his mouth and it would just come
Yeah,
out.
it's just incredible
Yeah.
because, I say, be prepared. Wilford didn't have to be prepared. He could remember from one time to the next. And he never carried a briefcase, anything home with him at
As
night.
I recall, he never carried a note when
Never
he lectured.
carried
did
a
he?
note.
He always used to
Never.
tell me that about 15 minutes before class, he'd take out last year's notes and glance at them, put them back in again, and then he'd go in and he could go on for 50 minutes. I couldn't do that.
No,
I
most people
forget
could
from
not.
one day to the next what I've said.
And he strictly used the lecture method of teaching, as I recall, most of the time. He was a...
I suppose so. I never was in one of his small classes.
No.
All right, in fact, well, I say I was in the humanities course because I used to sit in on those lectures just to hear them
Oh, yes.
and keep in touch with what was going on, because I was a tutor in humanities, and then I gave lectures myself, and the literature lectures I gave.
Well, along with Dr. Payne and Dr. Espinosa, you mentioned some very, to me, and I knew they're both colorful people. There are others, too, both staff and faculty, I imagine, that stand out in your memory that were helpful or unusually different, anything at all, because I think in a tape like this, it's kind of nice to include some of them, but we probably won't have opportunities. Some of them, of course, are gone, too.
Yeah. And we missed out on a lot of them, of course, because there were those before we came, when the school was much smaller. I always was a little bit disappointed that I didn't have, at least one semester out at that old campus, which was just horrible. There they separated the men from the boys, no question about it.
The house up north.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that was...
And, you know, they had odds and ends of buildings. One of them had a great big crack down through the wall, and every time the streetcar went by, they thought the whole thing was going to collapse. But that I didn't experience at all. And I missed out on a lot of the people that way. Who are some of the other people that we should speak of? Jim Earle, of course, was...
he was a wonderful teacher.
Yeah. Very, very deliberate,
Oh,
very
yes.
slow. And you
Oh,
certainly knew
Yes,
him.
I remember him.
Yes.
I do.
He amused me so one time when somebody had said to Ralph, "Well, how is my son doing in class?" or something like that. And I said to Jim, "For goodness sakes, how do you answer that question?" And he said, well, he was very deliberate, you know. He said, well, he said, I have a very good answer. And this is when we used to have parents' night, if you can believe it. He said, whenever someone comes up to me and says, well, how is my Johnny doing? I always say, I have great hopes. And that seems to
That's a good stock phrase. I want to remember that one.
Yeah,
That's a great
well,
one,
it was
isn't it?
particularly apropos because in those days this parents' night business was The first Saturday night, I think it was, a Friday night of the semester.
Know the kids
you didn't know one from
another.
another, you know. You hadn't any idea.
Oh, right at the
And
beginning
the
of
parents,
the term.
then they'd say, English department's over here, and so forth and so on. And people would come in and start asking, you know, about how Junior is doing. You hadn't the faintest idea who Junior was at that point.
Nor care.
No,
Oh,
I
dear.
think of other names that I'm quite sure. Salinger and some of those people.
Oh.
Sullinger, yeah.
Yes,
Dr. Sullinger. Mhm.
yeah. Well, he wasn't that fascinating.
Well, after all, you're putting this on tape, woman.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But he was a colleague.
Yes, he was a colleague.
I was just trying to suggest a few names that we could remember in common, and we'll pass him over quickly then. But the department that you were a part of and then that you headed, there were names that flow in and out there, people who came, come and gone. And, and our college, certain areas of that, administratively, I imagine.
Ben Boyce, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a fellow, Claude Henry, who came as director of freshman English, taught for us for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, and then he went to be headmaster at Brownell.
Oh, yes.
And from there he went to Colorado to, what's the name of the
Fort
place?
Collins.
Fort Collins, yeah.
And of course, there was Bob Harper in the
Oh,
English
sure, yes.
department.
Yeah.
He
Who
and
still
Rhoda.
lives, and
Yeah.
who became dean,
Mhm.
and then retired, and came back to the English department for a couple of years. He lives in Estes Park. I don't think of any particularly colorful anecdotes about those people. They were good people, both of them strong members of the department.
I suppose one of the things we could talk about are, I think of you always in my personal knowledge of you, as not being an administrative type of person. And yet for many years that I've known you, you were chairman of the Department of English. And I've often felt that you weren't, I don't mean to suggest that you didn't do your work well, but that you didn't especially enjoy being an administrator.
No.
Am I right about
Right.
that, Ralph?
I took the job. You see, I'd been here 2 years. I was next in line. Ben Boyce left to go. He first went to Lincoln and then to Durham, North Carolina, to Duke. And I took the job because I'd got along very well with him. I didn't know whom they'd bring from outside. Well, I applied for the job at that point. And one of the people they were considering was a man who had had a small office off my larger office when I was teaching at Harvard. And I just thought, well, I don't want that guy coming in, taking over. And it didn't amount to much then. We had, what, 4 or 5 people in the department. But I didn't realize it. It grew and grew and grew, of course. More majors, more instructors, everything got more and more oppressive, really, because I wasn't enjoying that part of it.
No, I imagine at first it was a very small.
It was a small department and little to do. I taught 15 hours and was chairman in addition. And then, as it became more and more demanding, my load was reduced to 12 and then to 9. And finally, when I had a sabbatical, as I did, to finish off one of the books I was working on in 19 oh something or other, whenever we changed over to the university system, the state system.
Oh, so it'd be, I think it
away.
was about
He did that.
1968 then, I
Yeah,
believe.
68, yeah.
Yeah.
It was 68, I think.
Dean Harper wrote to me and said that when I came back, I would have to teach only 6 hours because the load had been reduced even further. And at that point, I realized that I didn't want to give up teaching to do more administration. I wanted to give up administration to do more teaching. So I wrote back and said, I'll come back and teach that way 1 year, and then I'm through, and you can get somebody else to take over the department so that I can teach more, because that's what I really wanted to do.
So then in those last regular years of your association with the university, you were really a full-time teacher then?
Yes, yeah.
Bruce Baker was chairman
Yes,
then.
he took over.
And out of it all, you enjoyed that part the most. I thought I had you pegged right on that administrative bit, that you didn't especially
Yeah, I didn't
enjoy
want
that as
to
a
be a
group.
dean
Yeah.
or a president, anything like that.
No.
I really enjoyed teaching.
I'm quite sure there were opportunities through the years that came your way that would have put you into more of an administrative frame of reference, and you probably usually declined.
Yep.
We can leave it at that, perhaps, for now.
Yeah.
But now, have we missed any people that came to mind as we brought it up a while ago, and I sort of threw it at you, Mary? Did you come up with anybody else that we ought to? I'm quite sure we'll think of them when we're done with the tape.
Oh, sure, of course.
But there were so many people, both the students and faculty, people that made a tremendous impression. Like you mentioned, the man who really turned you into the teaching field many years ago by suggesting that as a professor that you thought well of. I imagine there were others along the way that come to mind, too, that were helpful to you and your neighbors and friends here.
Well, I think of students, too.
Oh, yes, indeed, the important
I mean,
part.
we still have great, great friends who were students and are friends now and come see us when they come back to town. And this is the most rewarding of all. I mean, they're fine young men or women who've gone ahead in their own professions. And, you know, they're nice enough to care and come see us. Really.
We had some very good students for a while there. And, of course, there was a time when an English major led to a great deal more immediate reward than is the case now. We had a great many people who would qualify for National Defense Fellowships, Woodrow Wilson Fellowships and that sort of thing. They would take them pretty much through graduate school. Those things are all gone now. It's very, very difficult to get into graduate school. But in those days, it was easier, and we got a lot who, you know, got interested in it and went off and then would write back to me and tell me how they were doing that kind of thing. And that is, as Mary says, still
tremendously rewarding. And those associations are maintained. You've known so many thousands of students really over the years. I think both of you probably in one way or another with your attachments to this school and others. And when you think of a student in the years like 38, 40, 45, 50, is the type of student that we attracted here at the university and whom you taught changed very much? The things they could go into certainly changed over the years, but students, as you've known them over the years, have there been any changes that you think of that are important? Or are they much the same always?
Well,
predictable and other things?
It would be difficult to answer that because I've been off the campus for 4 years now, and I'm not sure that they differ from Creighton students.
I don't mean now. I mean just generally over your span of teaching here.
No, I would say they remain pretty much the same. We had a great span. At Creighton, there's much less of a span than there is here. That is, at Creighton, they come from pretty much the same kind of families, same religion, same economic level. It's expensive to send kids to Creighton, much more expensive than here, so on. So that they are pretty much alike. But here, you have all sorts of ranges. You have plenty of kids who are working, of course, to earn every penny of it.
Yes.
And there are other kids who could go elsewhere, but for some reason want to stay in Omaha, who come from quite different economic backgrounds. And, of course, we have all kinds and shapes of religions, that kind of thing.
And ages, too, don't you think?
Oh, yes,
you know,
great spans in ages.
Because I used to take classes here, and I never felt the least bit out of place. I mean, I'd be the oldest one in the room, of course, but it never bothered me any. I mean, students are very tolerant of...
And the adult student has been so accepted around here for so long.
Yes, exactly. Really.
And I think that's one of the real strengths of our university, too.
Oh, I do, too.
Oh,
it's
yes,
diversification. I like that. I like feeling you, because you're not singled out anyway whatsoever.
You know, for all the years and some of the honors that you received, Ralph, I mentioned at the opening part of our time here as we reflected, you've acquired many honors as a teacher, and along with writing and other kudos that you've received. But I wondered, for those who might be sitting down to watch this tape, you said earlier you don't have any specific philosophy of teaching. But yet, as you reflect on it, maybe there are certain things that you have found over the years that make for a good day in the classroom, that have made you feel good and worthwhile and productive. And you might, if you would, share some of those, if you could in a general way.
No, I'm afraid I can't cooperate that way either, because so oftentimes it happens, I work on you know, what I'm going to say the next day, and I think, I've got it licked, and I go in and it just seems to fall flat. And another time, it's even happened when I was worried because I felt I wasn't properly prepared, that I'd get in there, and I suppose the adrenaline would get going or something would happen, and I was aware of the fact that I need to work on it particularly hard, but it's gone better than when I was better prepared.
It is strange, isn't it?
Just as students oftentimes will say after an examination, oh, I don't think I did well on an examination, or the very reverse, I think I really had that one licked. And it's the opposite of what they think. The time they think they had it licked, they went sailing through and really didn't put their minds to it. The time they had to work over it, they probably did a better job. And I think can extend to professors as well.
You can't put it and cut it in any pattern. It's just sort of a personal thing that relates to a
Yeah,
certain
as I say,
period in time.
It's all day by day. I don't have any philosophy. I don't know what I do or why I do it.
But right now you're still doing it. I was
I'm
going to
still
ask
doing
you
it.
in our last minutes together, for both of you, I think as we reflect on it in 1979, there's been a real change in your life in these past years. You've retired from your attachment to the university, but you have been very busy, both of you. And I think for people who watch this, we become more and more interested in what in the world do we do with our time when we retire. And as a case in point, let's talk about the Wardles. What are you doing these days? You mentioned the teaching, and let's come back to that, but what are some of the other things we're involved with here?
Well, you're the one who's more involved than I am.
Because
Oh,
when I
I'm
called
not.
you, you're not
No.
home necessarily.
Oh,
You're busy with something.
Well, I don't know. I just took on a new job with the Red Cross to call for blood donors, which is something I'd like to do. And I do a lot of needlework, and I belong to a study group, and I play bridge, and I read for the blind.
Yeah, that's
and
something we both do.
yeah, that's fascinating. I love that. I really
For
do.
blind students in the public schools.
Wonderful.
There are three of us who record any books that any visually impaired child might need in any of the Omaha public schools. And Ralph's done a national tape. I haven't done one of those, but we read anything and everything that they send us, which is so it's very good for us because we don't have quite this. I just finished a geography book that told me a lot of things I didn't know. He's doing a geography book now too.
And geography has changed a lot since I was in school, believe me.
And then along with this, you've kept up your teaching in a variety of areas at Creighton.
And
Yeah.
then he's writing, as he said earlier, he's writing a book. We've got the back porch with all the stuff on it now.
I had one published in March of this year, the letters of Mary Wollstonecraft. I went back to her in my old age and edited all these letters. You see, nobody was interested in them at first, but now they're highly prized.
Now
so
they're
I got
becoming-
Lord Abinger to give me permission to publish them, and I did. But meanwhile, I'm working on, before that, and now again, I'm back on Charles Lamb. So that takes time, and in fact, I can always sit down and spend time on it.
So you continue your research and your writing.
Yeah.
So in many ways, your life really hasn't changed much, has it?
Oh, no,
Not a
not
great deal.
while he's
That's-
teaching,
I-
not while he continues to
Yes,
teach.
many people say to me, there are so many things I've always wanted to do, and now I have a chance to do them now that I'm retired. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I've been doing just exactly what I wanted to do for all these years.
Yes.
I just want to keep at it and not stop.
I think
That's
I think that's a nice way to end. You continue to do and will as long as you can what you enjoy most, and that's teaching and
Right.
writing and doing research. And you continue to do various things and attachments that relate to the family and the public, and volunteer work and other things. And I thank you both for joining me for this hour. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you both, and I thank you sincerely.
Thank
you,
you
Paul.
for listening.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for joining us for another of our hours known as Reflections in Time.
Ooh, look at that beast.